And we're live! Hey everybody, we're here with Marcy and Miranda, and we are in week 4. We've made it more than halfway through, and so grateful for everyone that is reading along with us. And so now you just get to eavesdrop on our brilliant insights onto Jesus Feminist. So, okay, girls, so our 2 chapters this week were, one was kind of about like a birth and labor and mothering metaphor for God, which really she can just begin to scratch the surface of all the resources that I'm finding out are out there about this. Marcy, I don't know if you've read, there's a book Lindy recommends called Is It Okay to Call God Mother, I think is what it's called. And I haven't read it yet, but I know there's so many resources. And it's something that I've been, and especially probably in the last year, thinking a lot about, and even just like the pronouns that we use to describe God, and how often we preach the scriptures that describe God as Father versus the ones that like describe God as like, you know, a mother who brings her children, you know, to her breast and things like that. So I'm excited to talk about that. And then the second chapter is about women's ministry. So that'll be fun too. So, so I'm going to put our questions in our chat here. And I also emailed them. So either way, whatever works for you. So at the very end of the chapter, she quotes somebody else. It's not her. It's her quoting someone, and now I don't remember who she's quoting. Oh, she's quoting Paul. That's a good person to quote. So this is a quote from Paul. I'm guessing this is the Message translation. The difficult times of pain throughout the world are simply birth pangs. But it's not only around us, it's within us. We're also feeling the birth pangs. And I said, this is a question I wrote, I said, seeing the birth pangs throughout the world is fairly easy. And so if we want to talk about that, we can, but I feel like that gets a lot of focus in our conversations, is like the brokenness on the outside of us. I just put, how do you see and feel the birth pangs within yourself? And also, when you frame those feelings within the labor birth metaphor, does that, or how does it shape the way you think and feel towards those pangs inside? So I'll kind of tell you the reason that I think this stuck out to me enough for me to make a question out of it was, since I can almost remember, like back to being a child, living at my parents', I remember this feeling that I would get randomly. I have this like one vivid memory of having it right when I got out of the shower, but I know that it happened, you know, more than once for sure. And I would just feel this sudden sense of like sadness or emptiness or longing. And I don't think especially in my younger years, even had the words to like describe it. But I would just feel probably like hollowness might be, you know, a good word for it. And it wasn't until probably high school or maybe even college or later when I realized like, oh, that's like, I feel like this is cheesy, but like that's a homesickness. Like that's everything can be perfect and something is still gone or missing or off. Like something is wrong here, because that was the thing I remembered, is that when I would feel it, it would never have like an inciting incident. Like it would not be that like I was having a bad day. It would be like everything was fine. And then I wouldn't even feel like upset. I would just feel like, oh, like, and I think that description of like a birth pain, just kind of that like kind of crippled over like, oh, like feeling would come, and then really like labor, it would go, you know? And I could never put my finger on it, I think, until I started to dig into a little bit more this concept of like the already not yet. I don't know if y'all have ever heard that. But like this idea that like God's kingdom is already here, and that we have already been rescued, and that God is already moving, and that he is not yet done, you know, and he's not yet completed it, and he's not yet, you know, the devil has already been defeated, and yet he is not yet dead in the ground, you know, and so I think that's why this question like came to me, and why this metaphor sticks out to me, is because even before I could even begin to wrap my mind around like my inner brokenness, or like my inner sin struggles, or any of those things, like before I was even close to self-aware. So probably before I met Dr. Waters and read Parker Palmer, because that was really the beginning of my inner exploration. Even before that, I had some awareness that there was something like off. And so I think for me, that's where I'll always go back to, is like that longing that I had even before I knew we were supposed to have a longing or something like that. So yeah, any thoughts on these questions? And kind of run with it however you want.
So yesterday, we were talking with one of my coworkers because he is due to give birth later this month, and so we were talking about, you know, the other women in the office, their experience giving birth, and you know, this is her second child, so what she's expecting with this one, and what she's wanting, and things like that. And so that was a fun little moment to sit in on as someone that has only been birthed. I've never given birth. So I think it was interesting to hear about how a mother experiences birth. So like the creation of life, and the pain and the toll that it takes on the person giving birth, but then also the struggle that it is for the child. There's pain involved in that. There's struggle. There's a foreign aspect to it. So I think it's something that a lot of it's not just one person experiencing in birth. It's a mutual pain that's felt.
Yeah.
So I think it also can remind us that we're not the only ones feeling pain in our world, that God is also experiencing our pain, and we're not alone in it. That's what I related to.
Dude, that's good. It is interesting, that idea that, because when I think about labor, I think about the mom. And then when I think about afterwards, you think about the baby. Like, it's like we almost can't, it's like it's almost easier as humans to think about one suffering party at a time, or one rejoicing party at a time, you know, and not the like interconnectedness of us, and I love of us with God. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. No, I love that metaphor, Miranda, because like you just imagine this baby is like, sorry, is being squeezed to this hole into this bigger like life, that it doesn't even have a clue where it's going or what's happening. And like it just has to trust that like following that light is going to be the next best part. And yeah, and I also enjoy the communal aspect of it, like that we just can't do anything alone. Like we can't be birthed, like we were birthed of nothing that we did, like that. It just, the way biology works, the way God made people, is that we have to do it communally. And so that's really cool. Yeah. And also, Holly, you were like, I feel a lot of the birth pangs too. I have like very vivid memories of laying on the couch when I was a child, and just sobbing inconsolably. And then like my parents would be like, "What's wrong?" and I would say, like, the world is broken, this is wrong, and this is wrong. And sometimes I feel like I didn't have the language for this then, but I felt like I was being confronted with my own privilege too. Where it was like, I don't deserve anything that I have, and I still have it, and I'm so sad right now. And so then I felt guilty for being sad about other stuff, and it was just a really weird cycle. And now, like, the birth pangs, sometimes it's so frustrating when you know you're going through a season of change, like internally, or things around you are changing, or things are just broken and you can't fix it. Like, you can join in the community that's working to ease these birth pangs, but I don't know, it just has to happen sometimes, and that's hard.
I got the chance last week to go hear Jen Hatmaker teach, and she talked about when she went into labor with her first kid, and she has this, very funny way of telling any story. She could probably make any story funny, but she just talks about, I think probably the reason I resonate with her is she's never done anything halfway. Like, she's just a little over the top, and I'm a little over the top. And she said she just told her husband, like, that she was going to be the first person ever to have a baby out her butt, because that's like how horrible the pressure was. Like, she was like, this baby is coming out of my butt, and Brandon was like, I don't think so, Jen. Like, you're not gonna be the first person, and anyways, but after she finished telling this funny part, she talked about how it is a good thing, like, because the pain was so horrible, and because she was convinced that the baby was going to come out not how it was supposed to, she said the only way she had that baby was because her body had that baby. Like, she said, like, I would still be pregnant with a 19-year-old kid. Like, I would have never chosen to follow through with it. Like, if my body had not taken over, I would be screwed, because the pain, I just wasn't in. Like, I wasn't all in for the pain. And she went on to teach about something that seems to just keep coming up for me, like, anywhere and everywhere. Like, when God does that, when it's like in every book and every blog and every podcast, and you're like, oh my gosh, I get it. Of just this idea that we've been taught to avoid pain. That we have been taught to navigate around it, to numb it, to deny it, all those things, but that the only way to have the baby is through the pain. Like, that there is no, I guess now with an epidural you can numb it, but like, and when I had a friend who was in recovery several months ago, and I went to a workshop with her, and they talked about how no matter if your coping tool is viewed as healthy or not, it's still a coping tool. So they talked about that, like, people that have ended up here because their coping tools aren't, quote, healthy or societally acceptable. Like, it's not societally acceptable to drink too much or to starve yourself or whatever. But and I don't know how much of this they said and how much God just talked to me about, but was like, some of you have societally acceptable coping tools, like shopping too much or working too much or yelling too much. And so no one ever sends you to recovery for it, but you have the exact same issue, is that, like, instead of walking through your pain, instead of feeling your anxiety, instead of addressing your sorrow, you're going to cope. And they had this really cheesy phrase and these hilariously cheesy bulletin boards all over the place that said, ride the wave. And it was like, these huge, like, surfer waves, like you were in elementary school, but it was like a recovery center full of grown adults. And I could understand why my friend hated the phrase so much. But the idea was that that the best way to something is through something. Like, that, and one of the things they tell you about, like, because they encourage you literally to, even for a season, drop healthy coping tools. Like, to literally not like have coping tools, which is so foreign to me. But what they said is society has taught us and the church that emotions can kill you, that your sorrow or your anger or your anxiety, that it'll kill you, but that's not true. That like your pain will not like kill you. And obviously there are like caveats there, like get medication if you need like antidepressants and things, as someone who takes an antidepressant. But overall, that like the feeling of anxiety you have when you walk into a room full of strangers, that you're not going to die. It feels like you're going to die, but you're not going to die. And so instead of running to your coping mechanism, whatever that might be, learn to sit through it and realize that it's not as dangerous as you think it is. And so anyways, to me, this is all tied back to this idea of labor, that like labor is this metaphor for like what it looks like to go through the pain, like to not cope, to not avoid, to not deny, but like to say like, I'm going to literally push through the pain, to like, and know that like I can survive it. And I think like in a society that's so out of touch with our emotions and is so quick to give us coping tools, that's been like a valuable lesson for me, even as I totally use my tools, like as I use my anxiety medication when I need it, or as I use deep breathing, or as I think like reframing it as like, hey, I can do this, like, and here's some tools I can use, like, but like I need to remember that even if I didn't have these tools, I would not die. Like I would be okay. And so I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just interesting that for me, this idea of walking through pain to get to the other side keeps like coming up in all these different forms. So, but yeah, it's a very strange thing to sit in a room with a bunch of therapists and then tell you like, don't cope, just feel. And you're like, what the heck? Like, do all the other therapists know this rule? Because I've been learning how to cope. That's what I've been learning how to do, you know? And, but it's really interesting. The example they gave is it was at an eating disorder clinic, and they said they used to, like, during meals, like, play music or let them play board games or things, like, while they were eating. But what they realized was they were just letting them trade one coping tool for another coping tool. And that so great, they weren't starving themselves anymore, but they still weren't like getting to the core. Like they weren't addressing the hard issues. They were just distracting themselves, you know, while they ate. So anyways, any other thoughts on birth or pregnancy or labor or Jesus? Okay, cool. Our second question is in that same chapter. And I love when Sarah's like Pentecostal charismatic side comes out, and you can tell it does in this quote. She says, "This is why I love testimony time in church. It has fallen out of fashion, but there is power in telling the stories of how God broke through for each of us." How have you seen storytelling impact your faith walk and faith community? And or what are creative ways we can revive testimony time in our communities?
So this is really interesting for me. Oh, go ahead, Miranda.
No, I want you to go first.
No. So I'm going to take it a step out of church and then bring it back. But so in direct selling or multi-level marketing, they tell you, like, tell your story, tell why you're doing this, like, make, like, your story is the most important thing that you have to share with people. And I think, like, it's so, like, that has helped create so many communities because it's, like, resonating with people, and they're like, hey, that sounds like my story. I want to connect with her. I want to do this. And I think it's interesting that, like, she says it has fallen out of fashion in the church because, like, I feel like there's this almost like, I'm afraid to put my story out there because maybe it's not the right Christian story. Maybe it's not the right way to share it. I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. But I really think when you like share your stories, when you like, we do joys and concerns in our church, and it's sometimes really awkward because no one wants to share anything. And Josh is always like, so I guess we're all a bunch of joyless people today. And then like there'll be someone who will like pop up with something, and it's good, but it's just like, I just feel like storytelling is so important because it shows who we are. And I think church would be so rich if we were sharing our stories more. Like the Bible is a collection of stories, right? And they were passed down orally to each other before it was put to print. And so there's just this deep value in stories. And so it has impacted my faith walk a lot. And I want more of it. I'm hungry for more stories.
Marcy, do you think the word or the phrase like storytelling or share your story can be like intimidating to people, or like make people think of like a particular kind of person? Like for me, immediately I think of Tim Palmer. Like it, like, so can you like speak to that a little bit, maybe with your experience with Rodan and Fields, or just in general in the church? Like, do you think we're causing people to maybe feel like they don't have something to bring to the table?
Maybe I think that sometimes people think, well, no one wants to hear about my stuff. Like my stuff's not as exciting as that person over there, or I'm not as creative as this person, or I'm not as passionate in this sense of, and so I cannot clearly communicate that. Is that answering your question?
Yeah. No, I just wonder, just as much as the word testimony, like intimidating or make people think of like one particular kind of thing, I almost wonder if storytelling now in our day and age can be just as like intimidating or kind of a black and white little box, that kind of thing. And I don't know, Miranda, if you have any thoughts on that. Because I think at first we'd like to think like, oh, storytelling, that opens it up to everyone versus testimony. But I almost wonder if it's really not any more open.
Yeah, I think I do not find myself to be a very good verbal storyteller. Like, I know some people that are fantastic storytellers. I'm like, oh yeah, I want to hear this person tell their story because it's so good. But I think that I have a very different testimony. Like, I feel like my testimony is different than any of the stories I have to tell. So,
how will you try to explain to us verbally how you would kind of distinguish those two?
So I think I see my testimony more of how I relate to God and how my relationship has evolved over time with God. And I find it much easier to express that than I am to tell you about this funny lady that I saw at Walmart and the way she made me laugh whenever she was talking about her pet chihuahua. Like that story I would just butcher and nobody would laugh. But I feel like my testimony is something that I can share and feel more comfortable knowing that it doesn't have to be funny or it doesn't have to be powerful. It just has to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Woo, Miranda is on fire today.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, because that's just not where I expected this conversation to go, in that you just really made a case for not replacing the word testimony with storytelling in the church. Like not feeling the need to modernize our verbiage, but that there's something unique about the word testimony in a church setting. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I wonder, I feel like this, for all of us, I would like to hear kind of your thoughts on this as far as like, we're a church culture driven a lot by those verbal testimonies, like the from the pulpit Sunday morning with the microphone. But like, what are other ways that we can share our testimonies? Like, what are, and to be more inclusive of all the unique ways that God's made us?
I think that recently people sharing the things that they have struggled with has really helped me through my struggles, because, for example, my mom has been had a lot of health issues, and she's had a lot of blood work done, and so it helps me to know whenever somebody else says something like, well, I know somebody that had those symptoms and it turned out to be this. And oh, you know what they should do? They should drink green tea or like something like that. I think it's a helpful way to build community and to know that some of these struggles you're not alone in.
Mm.
And one of my good friends that I've made recently, she has a member of her family that is going through a similar situation, not the same situation, but one that is relatable. And it's been really great to talk about our shared feelings about the questions we have. Maybe not answering those questions, but just having someone to share them with has been incredibly powerful and important.
I think that's why the Me Too campaign just a few weeks ago was so viral, is that and again, I don't know that I would have ever thought of that as testimony time per se, but that is what it was doing, was saying like, you're not alone. And how interesting that it connects back to what you said, is that like all a testimony has to be is honest. Like, it doesn't have to be funny, it doesn't have to be catchy, it doesn't have to be well worded. It's just your story, like, brought to the table in an authentic way, which is what we saw literally, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of women doing. So what about you, Marcy, like as a writer, as an artist, as, kind of all of these different gifts? Are there ways, like, is a testimony just verbally sharing, or is a testimony larger than that, or can it be larger than that?
Yeah, I think it's way larger than that. In my writing, I try to share people's testimonies on whatever the topic is, and to get at the heart issue of it all. I think it's a way to share their stories and what they're doing in an authentic way, so that more people know that this is what drives them, or this is what's driving an organization, or this is what, I just think, and I think it's important to do that in Alpine's context, because we're a town of 6,000 people. Everyone knows everybody, but not everyone does know everybody. And I think it's a neat way to authentically bring people together. At least that's what I strive to do. I think, and then obviously there's other venues where you're writing, or people use art to tell their story, and they'll hear a sermon or something, and it incites this artistic image in their head, and they have to put it out in paper because that's how they're processing it. That's how they're engaging with their own story. So I think it goes well beyond verbal.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot, and it's okay if you don't have an answer, Marcy, but you just brought up a really interesting point, because you're as a journalist, as a reporter, you're creating space for people to share their stories. So if we as like believers feel that we're not only called to share our story, but to create space for people to share their stories or testimonies, which I do believe that. Like, how do you do that? Like, what kind of questions do you ask? Or like, can you just speak a little bit to like, because I think one thing that we do in the church is we just expect everyone to know, like we'll just like give people a piece of blank paper and say on Sundays, we're all going to share a testimony. Write your testimony down and share it. Like, and while someone like me would be happy to do that, and I'll take up everyone's 5 minutes.
Yeah.
How do we, I don't even want to say like a formula or anything, but what have you learned in your time about how to draw that out or to help people realize what's already inside of them?
Josh is dancing in the kitchen. Yeah, so sometimes I feel like a 2-year-old, but a lot of it's like, okay, so why, for example, why did you decide to open a bakery that had vegan options? Because she said, I wanted to have something for everyone, and I want to show people that good food is good, like healthy food is good. I was like, okay, well, why is that important? Why do you think people need to know that healthy food is good? Well, so that they have more options, and so that, it would go on from there. She would say, like, I want people to feel connected to the story of their food. And I was like, well, why is that important? And then it would go into, well, because when you eat good food that came from the ground and the story behind it, then you're able to feel more connected to the people who made it and to the earth. And when we feel more connected to the earth, we're able to treat it better, or you just go down this path of peeling these layers of like, why is that important? Well, okay, well, in that you said this, why do you think that that's important? And then a lot of times I'll ask someone like, well, will you please go deeper? You said your daughters told you that you couldn't quit because you would be unhappy. Well, how did that shape this space? Like the why and the how, and get behind the deeper reasons to the front answer.
That's good. And I don't even know if y'all have anything to add here, but I think something that we have to note in this discussion, specifically around women, is just like how many women genuinely don't believe they have anything interesting. They don't believe that they literally, like, when you're just trying to do like a get to know you question and you say like, tell us one interesting thing about you. Like, so many women are like, I have nothing. And I'm like, there's no way. Like, that's literally impossible. Like, if you've lived on the earth for even like 10 years, you probably have like one interesting thing about you. Like, and I mean, I'm sure that's a whole another hour-long conversation of why I feel like if you put a bunch of men in a room and said, tell us something interesting, most of them have something to say. And women are like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you don't have a favorite food or like some like silly book that you love, or, but I think part of it is in the church specifically is like, and this is so ironic or gross coming from me, is like Christian celebrity writing and speaking culture, of like, if you haven't started a nonprofit or, adopted 10 kids or whatever, written 12 books on the New York Times, then you don't have anything to say during that get to know you question. Instead of saying like, I quietly, like work for this volunteer organization, or I lead the children's choir at my church, or, like championing like everyday like faithfulness. But anyways, I just think like we would probably be remiss to talk about testimony and not identify how much like insecurity and inferiority and comparison complex comes up probably for most women. So. Okay, well, if no one else has anything, I'll throw our third question up. This one's so easy. I'm sure we can just sum up this next question in a few seconds. How do you define friendship? What does authentic community between women look like to you?
For me, I think it has to be genuine, thoughtful, and uplifting. Both friendship and community.
How would you define uplifting, Miranda?
I would define it as actively making others better.
So not uplifting in this like always positive, like cheery way.
No, because
because your first word was
always positive.
Yeah. Your first word was genuine, so then it caught me off guard when you said uplifting because of kind of that view I have of uplifting as like rainbows and butterflies. But I like that. This like active making each other better, making the world better. And she talks about that in that chapter, that the strongest communities of women she sees they have purpose. Like they aren't just like hanging out. They're like, they have like common like passion and purpose, that's like your definition of uplifting. I really like that. You're all about redeeming the words today. You've redeemed testimony for me. You've redeemed the word uplifting for me. All these words, I was just ready to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Goodness, I came to book club today. Marcy, what about you? You're pretty good at being a friend. How do you define it?
Thanks. I define it as being present to people, where they are, what they're going through, and like also bringing your present self there, which is something I think I'm still learning. But and what I mean by that is like it takes sharing parts of yourself too, like being present to who you are and sharing that with them so that you can be present to each other together. Yeah.
I actually was in a conversation on Twitter about this definition of friendship earlier this week, which is why I was excited to bring it to y'all, because it was super, super interesting. And we actually defined friendship a lot by talking about what it's not. And it was mostly women involved in the conversation talking about like the bad stereotypes of friendship that we've gotten from the world, and we ended up like ragging on Shonda Rhimes really hard for Meredith and Christina, and like this whole concept of like having a person, and like, you know, and how really for most of us that's just codependency, and you know, we talked about just this idea that like a friend is, you know, you travel and you have a group of friends that you always travel with, and you have this sparkly picture frame that that has BFF written on it, and you know, you're each other's bridesmaids, and then you birth each other's babies, and then you grow old together like the Golden Girls, and just kind of these like unrealistic expectations, especially of girl friendships. Like I think that is a uniquely women's problem. Like I don't think most little boys grow up worrying about who's going to be their groomsman or who's going to be in their BFF picture frame. And I'm really like slow to make distinctions between men and women these days, but I just think there's a societal pressure on women when it comes to friendship, which is good in that women usually have closer friends than guys do, you know, so there's like a good and a bad, I think, of that. But the two words that came up for me for defining friendship were consistency and reliability. And I think that really probably speaks to the season of life that I'm in. I don't know that 10 years ago those words would have even hit my like radar, because I think at that point friendship just was consistent and it was reliable, because that was like, I didn't have to work. I didn't have to we all lived in the same town, you know, like I wasn't splitting time with husbands and kids, you know, like all those were just givens. Like, especially, I mean, 11 or 12 years ago and when I was in high school, you literally spent all day with your friends, and then most nights you spent together, and then all weekend you spent together. Like, there was consistency, there was reliability, like, and if there wasn't, you just weren't friends with those people, because there were plenty of people that were reliable and consistent. But like 10 years out, man, like reliability and consistency can be make or break it for me. Because like, if you live hours away, do you still answer your phone? Like, if you're married, can I still depend on you? Like, you know, if you have a big dog job and are raising kids, like, do you still remember my birthday? You know, like, and honestly, that's been a very hard transition for me. I mean, I'm 7, 8 years out of college, a long time. And it's really only been within the last 1.5 to 2 years that I've started to adjust to the fact that, like, it is unreasonable to expect adult friendships to look like dorm life. And I'm still like, I'm like pissed about it, to be honest. Like, I don't think I'll ever like get over my frustration at that. And I joke that I'm looking forward to a retirement community, because it's like dorm life all over again. You like live down the hall from your friends and you have theme parties, and it's the best. And I'm really excited about it. But, you know, for a person who leans more extroverted, for a 2 on the Enneagram, which is the most relational number, nothing was better than dorm life. Like, you always had someone to watch a movie with. You always had someone to go grocery. Like, there was never, even people you weren't super close to, you could just say like, hey, I'm going to run and grab a pizza. And adult friendship just doesn't work like that. Spontaneity is not very wired into being an American adult. Even with friends that live locally and are single, that can still be difficult. It's not even just like, oh, my, you know, stick in the mud married friends. It's like, it's hard to be spontaneous. And so like having to like adjust to the fact that like it doesn't make a friendship less special when you have to schedule everything. Because in my mind, I'm like, no, real friends just see each other. You know, like real friends just remember to call. And you know, I have these friends where we have like scheduled phone dates, like weekly scheduled phone dates. And that it's taken so long for me to not believe that somehow that lessens its value, if that makes sense. And then I think authentic community, obviously these questions are tied together. That's why I put them together. But Marcy, I think what you said about how people never have joys at your church, I think a couple weekends ago I was preaching on authentic community, and we talked about how church can be this place where we're only allowed to be sad, especially when you get with a group of women, and you're supposed to be doing like joys and concerns, but it just becomes and concerns. And everyone's like talking about all the hard things, and you were like walking in and you had this really good week and you were ready to tell everyone about it, and then you feel like a real butthead because everyone's like sick or their dog died or their kid's struggling in school, and you're like in a really good season and you want to tell everyone about it, but like you feel like you can't because you don't want to seem insensitive. And how crazy that is. And so to me, authentic community, I think, can get like bent towards like being authentic in our brokenness, and that's only half the equation. Like, we should be able to be authentic like in our really beautiful seasons. And like, to me, authentic community is like summed up in like weep with those who weep and laugh with those who laugh, which is my translation, obviously. Like, and I remember 4 or 5 years ago when I had that experience when I was walking intimately with housemates, and on the same day, something really bad happened to one of us and something really good happened to the other one. And we like held the tension. And I'm not saying we did it perfectly, but instead of just ignoring one or the other, we like held it. And we were like celebrating and rejoicing with one, and we were like weeping with the other, and just like holding this big, complicated like mix of emotions. And that was like the first time it clicked for me. That was like, oh, that's what community looks like. Is that like the example I always give is that I can go to a friend's wedding and celebrate deeply with them, and then that they could pull me aside, the bride, and hold me close as I wept that it wasn't my turn yet. Like that would be true, or that someday Marcy could come to my baby shower and she could deeply rejoice with me, and then I could pull her aside and weep over her infertility, which she's not actually infertile, anyone that's watching, just to clarify, that's an example. Josh is going to be like, what? I didn't even, why are you announcing things I didn't even know? But like that's like real community, is that everyone's like full selves can be welcome at the table at the exact same time. And honestly, I think that would make the church an incredibly unique and attractive place, because I don't think the world knows how to hold those tensions very well. So that would be what I would say authentic community is. I know it's 1:04. Can we throw our last question up? Do y'all have time, or do you need to go? You good? Okay.
I have time.
Hold on. Oh gosh, now I've broken my computer. What's happening? Okay, so our last question is about women's ministry. Do you think women's ministry has value in today's church world? And if so, what do you think kingdom-centered women's ministry looks like?
I think there's value. I'm not entirely sure what it looks like, but I think that it provides, I don't know, it goes back to what you said, where it needs a purpose. And I think it needs to give those involved a sense of purpose.
Miranda, do you have any words or thoughts of what it shouldn't be? Like things that you don't think are kingdom-centered women's ministry?
Ooh, things that are non-inclusive. For one, I don't think that it should I don't think it should. I don't know. It keeps going back to that inclusion thing, because I think that it should include all women, and I think that it should find time for all women and space for all women, and like I think that it should look to do ministry that is for everyone, and maybe not just for women or for men or for old or for young or anything like that. I think it should meet it. I don't know. Part of our discussion day is like making me think more about meeting people where they're at, like Marcy said, and it shouldn't discourage anybody that's in a different place than the other women in their church.
Thanks. Marcy, you got any thoughts on women's ministry? You're a pastor's wife, so I'm assuming that this is your calling in your life, is to run the women's ministry at your church. Is that right?
You're funny. You're hilarious. I think women's ministry is valuable because I do think that there are experiences that women have that help them connect to other women. But I also want to look at how we bring men into those experiences too and share that together. Because I think we all have like valuable things to bring and learn from one another. I just think I don't have a full coherent thought on this, but I just want it to be inclusive. I want it to be a place where everyone is celebrated too. Yeah, kind of like what Miranda was saying.
And I'll just add my one more recent thought about women's ministry is that it needs to be balanced. And what I mean by that is I feel like a lot of women's ministries are great at the up perspective. So we want to connect women to God. And then some are really good at the in perspective. We want to connect other women in the church to other women in the church. And then some are really good at the out perspective. We want women in our church to like serve out. And I'm struggling to find women's ministries that are figuring out that all three of those are valuable. That like if you just have a missions-oriented women's ministry, but you aren't feeding your women and connecting them, it won't work. And if you're just, doing Bible studies, but there's not connection, that it won't work. And if there's just connection, but and so figuring out that balance of kind of those three key parts of connecting women with God, connecting women with women, and connecting women with the world, I think is probably what builds like strong, sustainable. I don't even care about strong, sustainable ministries. I care about strong, sustainable communities of women. And I think the purpose of serving outwards is important. I think the connection with other women is important. But then I also think like the discipleship of women is important. So any other thoughts? Anything else you need to say or tell us? Miranda, any other words you want to redefine for me today so that I can run out and tell everyone about testimonies and uplifting communities? It's so great. I love it.
No, I'm just very thankful for this time. It's kept the week going on the up and on the up, and so I'm very thankful for the time and the space to connect with you.
Me too, Miranda. This has been fun. And Marcy, you're all right. Miranda and I are pretty glad you're here. And yeah, okay. Well, we'll already be to week 5 next week. So we'll see you later. And thanks everyone who watched us afterwards. We're pretty much famous. So, all right. I'll talk to you guys later. Love y'all.
Bye.
Bye.